The photograph slipped from the little girl's trembling hand, fluttering to the marble floor of the mansion like a fallen leaf. Her wide, hazel eyes lifted to the man standing before her, the one they whispered about in shadows, the one whose name made grown men flinch. "Why is my mom's picture in your mansion?" she asked, voice small but steady. In that moment, something ancient and dormant cracked open inside Lorenzo Valentino's chest, something he'd buried beneath years of blood and violence and calculated cruelty. He looked down at the child, then at the photograph of the woman he'd loved and lost 7 years ago, and the impossible began to awaken. Welcome, besties. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Lorenzo had built his empire on fear. At 35, he controlled half of New York's underground operations, his word absolute, his reputation merciless. He lived in a fortress disguised as a penthouse, surrounded by art and violence in equal measure, and he'd long ago accepted that love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. The photograph had been his only weakness, hidden in his private study where no one ventured uninvited. Until now. Until this child with eyes too knowing for her 6 years had wandered through doors his security should have kept locked. "What's your name?" His voice came out rougher than intended. The little girl clutched a worn stuffed rabbit to her chest, studying him with the same fearless intensity he remembered from another face, another lifetime. "Isabella," she whispered. "My mommy said never tell strangers my name, but you have her picture, so maybe you're not a stranger." Something twisted behind Lorenzo's ribs. "Where is your mother now?" The question emerged careful, controlled, though his pulse hammered against his throat. Isabella's lower lip trembled. "She went to heaven. The sickness took her. That's what Aunt Marie said before she left me at the church, and didn't come back." The room tilted. Lorenzo gripped the edge of his desk, mahogany solid beneath his fingers, grounding him as the world fractured and reformed around a truth he'd never suspected. The woman in the photograph, Sophia, the American aid worker he'd fallen for during his brief attempt at legitimate business in Florence, the one who disappeared without explanation 7 years ago, leaving him hollow and rage-filled. She'd been pregnant. This child was hers. Possibly his. The timeline aligned with cruel precision. "Marco," Lorenzo called, his voice carrying the command that moved mountains and ended lives. His second appeared instantly, a wall of muscle and loyalty who'd served the Valentino family for 2 decades. Find out everything about Isabella Russo. Birth records, medical history, DNA if possible. And locate this Aunt Marie. I want answers within the hour. Marco's eyes widened fractionally at the child's presence, but he nodded, disappearing as silently as he'd come. Lorenzo turned back to Isabella, who'd settled onto his leather sofa as if she owned it, tiny legs swinging, rabbit positioned carefully beside her. "Are you hungry?" The question felt foreign on his tongue. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cared about anyone's basic needs beyond his own strategic interests. Isabella nodded solemnly. "I haven't eaten since yesterday. Aunt Marie said the church would feed me, but nobody came." Fury ignited in Lorenzo's chest, cold and precise. He pressed the intercom. "Bring food to my study. Everything a child might want. Now." Within minutes, his staff had assembled a feast that would have fed 10 children, and Lorenzo watched in fascination as Isabella approached the spread with cautious hope, selecting items with a careful consideration of someone who'd known hunger. The next day brought confirmation that shattered what remained of Lorenzo's carefully constructed emotional barriers. Isabella was his daughter. DNA evidence absolute. Birth certificate listing Sophia Marie Russo as mother and father unknown, dated exactly 7 months after he'd last seen Sophia in Florence. She'd carried his child, raised her alone, died of cancer without ever reaching out, without ever telling him he had a daughter who existed in the world. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath it ran something more powerful than anger. This little girl with Sophia's eyes and his stubborn chin was his, and nothing in heaven or hell would take her from him now. "You're staying here," he told Isabella that evening as she sat in his study again, this time with a children's book he'd had someone procure. She looked up, confusion and hope warring in her expression. In your house? Forever. The tentative question nearly broke him. Forever, Lorenzo confirmed, the word a vow weighted with everything he'd never been able to promise Sophia. You're my daughter, Isabella. I'm your father, and I protect what's mine. He'd expected tears, questions, perhaps fear. Instead, Isabella smiled, small and genuine, and climbed from her chair to wrap thin arms around his waist. Lorenzo stood frozen, uncertain, until instinct older than his violence moved his hands to rest gently on her back, holding carefully as if she might shatter. By the end of the week, Lorenzo's household had transformed. The fortress penthouse now contained a bedroom decorated in soft purples and golds, shelves filled with books and toys, and a little girl who wandered the halls with increasing confidence, charming even his hardest soldiers with her solemn observations and unexpected questions. But Isabella's integration into his world created complications Lorenzo hadn't anticipated. She needed stability, normalcy, the kind of life that required things like school enrollment and parent-teacher conferences and birthday parties. Things that required a mother's touch. That evening brought her. Sophia's photograph had revealed a sister Lorenzo never knew existed, and his people had tracked her to a modest apartment in Brooklyn where she worked as a pediatric nurse. Amelia Russo, 28, curvy and soft where Sophia had been angular, with the same hazel eyes but darker hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. She'd received his message, delivered by men who knew how to make requests sound like commands, and she'd come despite obvious fear, driven by love for a niece she'd been searching for since her sister's death. Where is she? Amelia's voice shook but her chin lifted with defiance as she stood in Lorenzo's living room, coat clutched tight despite the warmth. Where's Isabella? If you've hurt her, I don't care who you are, I'll destroy you. Lorenzo felt something shift inside him at her fierce protectiveness, at the way she vibrated with maternal fury despite being barely more than 5 feet tall, and clearly terrified. She's safe. She's sleeping. But we need to talk about what happens next. He gestured to the seating area, watching as Amelia's eyes widened at the opulence surrounding her, the art worth millions, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan like a kingdom laid at his feet. Amelia perched on the edge of a chair, refusing the drink Lorenzo offered, her body language screaming distrust. What happens next is you let me take my niece home. She belongs with family, not with some criminal who happened to know her mother. The words held bite, but Lorenzo heard the fear beneath them, the uncertainty of someone trying to protect a child from a world they didn't understand. I am family, Lorenzo said quietly, dangerously. Isabella is my daughter. DNA confirmed. Which makes you her aunt, yes, but also makes me her father and legal guardian by blood and law. He watched Amelia process this, watched the emotions cascade across her expressive face. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a desperate calculation. Sophia never mentioned you. She said Isabella's father was dead, that he died in an accident before she even knew she was pregnant. The lie felt like another betrayal, but Lorenzo understood it now. Sophia had known what he was, what world he inhabited, and she'd chosen to protect their daughter from it even if it meant raising her alone, dying alone. She was trying to keep Isabella safe from me, from my life, Lorenzo acknowledged. And maybe she was right to do so. But circumstances have changed. Isabella has no one else now except me and you. The negotiation that followed revealed Amelia's backbone beneath her curves and soft appearance. She refused to simply hand Isabella over, insisted on being part of her niece's life, demanded assurances about safety and stability and education. Lorenzo found himself oddly compelled by her fierce advocacy, by the way she met his eyes despite obvious fear, by how she prioritized a child's needs over her own safety. By the time they'd reached an agreement, dawn was breaking over the city and Lorenzo had made a decision that would alter both their lives irrevocably. Move in here, he said, the command emerging before he'd fully thought it through. Isabella needs you. Needs that maternal presence and continuity with her mother's family. I can provide security, resources, everything material. But I can't provide what you can. So move in, help raise her, and I'll ensure you never want for anything. Amelia stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. You want me to live here? In your penthouse? With you? The skepticism in her voice would have amused him if the situation weren't so critical. I want Isabella to have stability. You clearly love her. She knows you, trusts you. It makes sense. What he didn't say was how something had shifted when Amelia had stormed into his home radiating protective fury, how he'd found himself watching the way lamplight caught at her hair, how her curves filled out her modest dress in ways that made his mouth go dry. Later that night, after Amelia had reluctantly agreed to a trial period and been shown to a guest room, Lorenzo stood in his study staring at Sophia's photograph. He'd loved her once, desperately and completely, and her loss had hardened something essential inside him. But looking at that image now, he felt the obsession loosening, transforming into something different. Gratitude, perhaps, for the gift of Isabella. And space, unexpected space, where something new might grow if he was brave enough to let it. The thought of Amelia sleeping 2 doors down, her presence soft and feminine in his masculine domain, created a tension he hadn't experienced in years. Want. Not just physical, though his body definitely responded to her, but something deeper. A hunger for the warmth she carried, the fierce protectiveness, the way she'd looked at him like he was a problem to be solved rather than a monster to be feared. The following morning brought Isabella's delighted shriek when she discovered her aunt in the kitchen. Aunt Mia. You found me. I knew you would. The child launched herself at Amelia with such force they nearly toppled, and Lorenzo watched from the doorway as Amelia held Isabella close, both of them crying, murmuring reassurances and love in voices thick with emotion. The scene did something to his chest, made it tight and uncomfortable in ways he couldn't name. This was what family looked like, what love looked like in its purest form. And he'd been invited into it, however uncertainly, however conditional the invitation might be. Good morning, Amelia said when she finally noticed him, Isabella still wrapped around her like a barnacle. Her eyes were red from crying but defiant, as if daring him to comment on her emotional display. Thank you for letting me see her. I'll start moving my things this afternoon if the offer still stands. Her formal tone amused him, even as it frustrated him. The offer stands. Marco will handle the logistics. You focus on Isabella. He poured coffee, hyper-aware of how domestic the scene was, how foreign. There are things we need to discuss about her routine, schooling, security protocols. Amelia's expression shifted to concern. Security protocols? Is she in danger? The innocent question reminded Lorenzo of the gap between their worlds. She's my daughter now. That automatically makes her a target for anyone who wants leverage against me. She needs protection, constant protection, which means you do too by association. He watched understanding dawn in Amelia's eyes, watched her pull Isabella closer instinctively. I won't let anything happen to her, he promised, the vow emerging with surprising intensity. Or to you. You're under my protection now, both of you. That's not negotiable. Something flickered in Amelia's expression at his words, something that might have been trust beginning to form or might have been awareness of him as something other than a threat. A few days later, Lorenzo's household had settled into a new rhythm. Isabella attended a private school with security detail invisible but ever-present, came home to Amelia's care and Lorenzo's awkward attempts at fatherhood, her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for years. But the addition of Amelia to his daily life created complications Lorenzo hadn't anticipated. She was everywhere. In his kitchen making breakfast, her curves highlighted by morning light through the windows. In the living room reading to Isabella, her voice soft and melodic. In the hallway late at night when he returned from business, her presence a reminder that his home was no longer just a fortress, but something warmer, more dangerous to the walls he'd built around his heart. You're staring again, Marco observed one evening as Lorenzo watched Amelia help Isabella with homework, their heads bent together over a book. It's distracting. Half the men have noticed. They're taking bets on how long before you make a move. Lorenzo turned his cold gaze on a second, but Marco didn't flinch. Decades of loyalty earned certain privileges, including the ability to call out his boss's increasingly obvious interest. She's here for Isabella. Nothing more. The words sounded unconvincing even to his own ears. Marco smirked. Keep telling yourself that. But for what it's worth, she looks at you too when you're not watching. Like she's trying to figure out if you're as dangerous as your reputation, or if there's something else underneath. That evening proved Marco right in ways Lorenzo hadn't expected. A business dinner required his presence, some tedious meeting with suppliers that couldn't be delegated, and he'd mentioned it to Amelia in passing. When he emerged from his room dressed in a tailored black suit, he found her in the hallway, breath catching audibly as her eyes traveled over him. The attraction was mutual, immediate, and impossible to ignore. "You look very handsome," she said softly, then blushed as if the compliment had escaped against her will. "I mean professional. You look professional." Lorenzo stepped closer, watched her pulse jump in her throat. "And you look beautiful." The words emerged rougher than intended. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy, but the way fabric molded to her curves made his hands itch to touch. "I'm just wearing normal clothes," Amelia protested, but her cheeks flushed darker, and she didn't step back. "There's nothing normal about you." Lorenzo reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, felt her shiver at the contact. "You burst into my life and turned everything upside down. You made this place feel like a home instead of a fortress. You gave Isabella back her smile. You make me want things I thought I'd buried with Sophia." The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Amelia's eyes went wide. "Lorenzo, I don't think we should. This is complicated enough, without adding whatever this is between us." But she didn't move away, didn't break the connection humming in the minimal space separating them. "It's already complicated," he murmured. "The question is whether we're brave enough to acknowledge it or coward enough to pretend it doesn't exist." Before Amelia could respond, Isabella's voice called from her room, asking for help with something, and the moment shattered. Lorenzo stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks with hands that weren't quite steady. "We'll continue this conversation later," he said, his tone making it clear that wasn't optional. He left for his meeting with Amelia's scent still clinging to him, jasmine and something sweeter, and spent the entire evening distracted by thoughts of soft curves and hazel eyes and the way she looked at him like he was more than the monster his reputation proclaimed. The following morning brought unwelcome complications. Lorenzo was reviewing security reports when Marco entered with an expression that promised trouble. "We have a problem. Someone's been asking questions about Isabella and Amelia. Street-level inquiries, but persistent. Could be nothing, could be someone looking for leverage." Lorenzo's blood went cold. "Who?" Marco shook his head. "Still tracking. But boss, if word is spreading about your daughter, about the woman living in your home, they become targets. Maybe we should increase security, limit their movements." The suggestion made logical sense, but Lorenzo knew Amelia would resist any restrictions that felt like imprisonment. She'd made that clear in their negotiations. Double the security detail, but keep it invisible. And find who's asking questions. I want names and motivations within 24 hours. Lorenzo's voice carried the edge that made men move mountains to obey. After Marco left, Lorenzo sat alone with scenarios spiraling through his mind. Rivals who'd love to strike at him through his newfound family. Enemies who'd use Isabella or Amelia as bargaining chips. The thought of either of them hurt because of his world made something vicious and protective roar to life inside him. He'd burn cities for less. He'd end anyone who threatened what was his. That evening, Lorenzo found Amelia in the library, curled into an oversized chair with a book, lamplight casting shadows that accentuated every curve. She looked up as he entered, something wary and aware flickering in her expression. "Isabella's asleep. She asked if you'd come say goodnight, but I wasn't sure when you'd be back." The domestic detail hit him unexpectedly. His daughter wanted his presence, trusted him enough now to request it. "I'll check on her." But Lorenzo didn't move, held instead by the sight of Amelia in his space, fitting there as if she'd always belonged. We need to talk about security, he said, watching her expression shift to concern. There's been activity suggesting someone's gathering information about you and Isabella. It might be nothing, but I don't take chances with people I care about. He saw Amelia register those last words, saw her process the implications. People you care about, she repeated softly. Is that what we are to you? People you care about? Lorenzo crossed the room, crowding into her space deliberately, watching her breath quicken. You know exactly what you are to me. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I feel the tension every time we're in the same room. This isn't just about Isabella anymore, and we both know it. Amelia stood, forcing him to step back or press fully against her. She chose to stand her ground. This is a bad idea. You're a criminal, Lorenzo. You hurt people, probably kill people. I saw my sister destroyed by keeping secrets, and I won't do that. I can't be with someone whose life is built on violence. The words should have stung, but Lorenzo heard the tremor in her voice, the way her body betrayed what her mouth denied. You're right. I am everything you say. But I'm also a man who would burn the world down to keep you and Isabella safe. I'm someone who hasn't felt anything real in 7 years until you walked into my home and reminded me what it means to want something beyond power and revenge. He reached out, cupped her face gently despite the violence inherent in his hands. I can't promise I'm good, Amelia. I can't promise my life won't touch yours in ways that scare you. But I can promise that nothing and no one will ever hurt you while I'm breathing. You've become essential to me, both of you, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. Amelia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I'm terrified, she whispered. Terrified of how much I want this despite knowing better. Terrified you'll break my heart the way you probably break everything you touch. Then be terrified with me, Lorenzo murmured, closing the distance until their bodies aligned, heat and want and impossibility between them. Be scared and brave and take the risk anyway, because I'm done pretending I don't want you. Done acting like you're just Isabella's aunt when you're so much more. He kissed her then, swallowing her gasp, tasting her surprise and surrender. Amelia melted against him, her curves soft against his harder lines, her hands clutching his shoulders as if he might disappear. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, years of loneliness and isolation and carefully maintained control shattering under the weight of genuine connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. Say yes. Say you'll give this a chance. Give us a chance, and I promise I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of that trust. Amelia's fingers traced his jaw, the gesture so tender it made his chest ache. One condition. No more secrets between us. If your world touches mine, I need to know. I need to be able to make informed choices, not be protected by ignorance. It went against every instinct Lorenzo had, but looking into her eyes, seeing the strength beneath the softness, he nodded. No more secrets. I'll tell you everything you want to know, even the parts that make you look at me differently. Later that night, after Amelia had retreated to her room with flushed cheeks and swollen lips, Lorenzo lay awake considering what he'd promised. Transparency went against decades of training, of carefully compartmentalized life, where business stayed separate from personal, where vulnerability meant weakness. But something about Amelia made him want to be different, to be better. She'd seen the worst of what he was and still looked at him with possibility instead of just fear. That was worth the risk of exposure, worth the discomfort of letting someone truly know him. The next day brought the information Marco had been gathering, and none of it was good. The inquiries about Isabella and Amelia traced back to the Castellano family, rivals who'd been testing Lorenzo's territory for months. They were traditional, brutal, the kind of organization that used family as weapons and saw mercy as weakness. The fact they had identified his daughter meant they were planning something, some play for power that would use Isabella as leverage. Lorenzo felt cold rage settle over him, the kind that made rational men run. No one threatened his child. No one. We need to move them, Marco advised during their strategy meeting. Somewhere secure until we handle the Castellano problem. Maybe the safe house upstate, fully staffed, completely off-grid. Lorenzo considered it, but the thought of sending Amelia and Isabella away, of not seeing them daily, felt impossible now. Increase security here instead. Full detail, rotating shifts, no one gets within 100 yards without identification. And reach out to our contacts in the Castellano organization. I want to know what they're planning before they make a move. Marco nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Boss, if they know about Isabella, they know you have a weakness now. They'll exploit that. Maybe it's time to remind people why crossing the Valentino family is a death sentence. The suggestion had merit. Lorenzo had been relatively quiet lately, focused on building legitimate business and maintaining territory without the aggressive expansion that had marked his younger years. That restraint might have been misinterpreted as weakness by rivals smelling blood in the water. Set up a meeting with our key people. It's time to send a message about what happens when someone threatens what's mine. The decision made, Lorenzo felt the familiar cold calculation settle over him, the part of his brain that strategized violence with the same precision others applied to chess. This was who he was, what he'd always been, and Amelia needed to understand that before they went further. That evening, he found her in the kitchen preparing dinner, domestic scene at odds with the war planning consuming his thoughts. We need to talk. Lorenzo's tone made Amelia set down her knife, wiping her hands on a towel as she turned to face him. That sounds ominous. He gestured for her to sit at the island, then leaned against the counter across from her, maintaining distance because touching her would derail this conversation. I promise no secrets. So, I'm telling you there's a problem. A rival family is asking questions about you and Isabella. They're looking for leverage against me, and you two are the most obvious targets. Amelia paled, but her voice stayed steady. What does that mean? Are we in danger? Lorenzo appreciated her directness, her refusal to dissolve into panic. Not immediately. My security is extensive and they'd be foolish to move against me directly. But it means things might escalate. I have to respond, have to make it clear that threatening my family carries consequences. Those consequences won't be pleasant, won't be legal, and I need you to understand what that means about who I am. He watched Amelia process this, watched her connect she'd probably been avoiding. You're going to hurt people. Kill people maybe. Not a question. Lorenzo nodded. If necessary, yes. To protect you and Isabella, I'll do whatever is required without hesitation or remorse. That's the man you're considering being with. Someone who solves problems with violence when necessary, who has blood on his hands and will again. The confession should have driven her away, but Amelia just looked at him with those hazel eyes full of complicated emotion. I hate that this is necessary. I hate that Isabella has to grow up knowing her father is dangerous. But I also understand that your world has different rules, and I'm choosing to be part of it. She stood, crossed to him, placed her hands on his chest over his heart. Just promise me you'll come back. Whatever you have to do, whoever you have to become to keep us safe, promise you'll always come back to us. The request hit Lorenzo harder than any threat could have. She wasn't asking him to be different, wasn't demanding he change his fundamental nature. She was just asking him to survive, to prioritize returning to her and Isabella over the violence his world required. I promise. Nothing will keep me from coming back to you. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, breathed in her scent like it was salvation. A few days later, Lorenzo's response to the Castellano inquiries made headlines in the underground channels where such things were reported. 3 of their operations shut down in a single night, key lieutenants arrested on charges that would stick thanks to evidence mysteriously appearing. No deaths, nothing that would trigger a full war, but enough to make the message clear. The Valentino family was not weak, and threatening them carried costs rivals couldn't afford to pay. Lorenzo came home exhausted, adrenaline still thrumming through his veins from the night's activities, to find Amelia waiting up for him in his study. You came back, she said softly, relief evident in her voice. I promised I would. Lorenzo shrugged out of his jacket, suddenly aware of how he must look, still wired from violence and strategy. Everything's handled. They won't bother us again. Amelia crossed to him, hands gentle as she helped him with his cufflinks, the gesture so domestic and caring it made his throat tight. Good. Because Isabella drew you a picture at school today, and she's very excited to show you tomorrow morning. She's starting to really see you as her father, Lorenzo. Don't make her lose you too. The reminder of his daughter's growing attachment, of the family he'd gained so unexpectedly, shifted something in Lorenzo's chest. He caught Amelia's hands, pulled her flush against him. I won't. I have too much to live for now. Too much to lose. You've both become my reason for being careful, for making sure I survive whatever comes. He kissed her then, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. Need and promise and the desperate hope that somehow they could make this impossible situation work. Amelia responded with matching intensity, her body molding to his as if they'd been designed to fit together. When his hands slid down to cup her curves, she gasped against his mouth, and Lorenzo felt control slipping. Amelia, he groaned against her neck. If you want me to stop, tell me now because I'm about to carry you to my bedroom and show you exactly how much I need you. Her answer was to pull his mouth back to hers, to press closer with a whispered, "Don't stop." Lorenzo lifted her easily, her curves filling his arms perfectly, and carried her to his room, closing the door on the rest of the world. What happened next was desperate and tender and consuming, two people finding solace and connection in each other's bodies, everything else falling away until only they existed. Lorenzo took his time despite urgency, learning every curve and sensitive spot, determined to give her pleasure, even as he took his own. Amelia responded with a passion that matched his. All hesitation burned away in the heat between them. Later, wrapped together in tangled sheets, Lorenzo traced patterns on her bare shoulder and felt something settle inside him. This was right. She was right. Whatever challenges his world threw at them, they'd face together. The following morning brought reality crashing back. Lorenzo woke to find Amelia gone from his bed, her side cool, suggesting she'd left hours ago. Panic he hadn't felt in decades gripped his chest until he heard voices from the kitchen, Amelia laughing at something Isabella said, the domestic normalcy almost painful in its sweetness. He found them making breakfast together, his daughter on a stool helping measure ingredients while Amelia guided her hands with patient instructions. They looked perfect together, looked like family, and Lorenzo felt his heart clench with possessive want. Good morning, Amelia said when she noticed him, color rising in her cheeks as memories of the night flooded between them. We're making pancakes. Isabella insisted you'd want some. His daughter beamed at him. Papa, Aunt Mia taught me to crack eggs. I only got shell in it twice. The casual use of Papa hit Lorenzo unexpectedly. When had that started? When had this child claimed him so completely? That's wonderful, Bella, he said, using the nickname that had emerged naturally over recent weeks. Can I help? The morning dissolved into flour and laughter and a breakfast that tasted better than anything Lorenzo's expensive chefs had ever prepared. But peace was temporary in his world. By afternoon, Marco appeared with news that tightened every protective instinct Lorenzo possessed. The Castellanos aren't backing down. Word is they're planning something bigger, some move that will force our hand. And boss, they've been watching the penthouse. They know Amelia takes Isabella to school every morning, know her route, her routine. Cold fury washed through Lorenzo. They wouldn't dare. But even as he said it, he knew they would. Rivals didn't follow the old codes anymore, didn't respect boundaries about family. If they thought they could hurt him through Isabella and Amelia, they'd try. We need to change everything, Lorenzo decided immediately. Different routes to school, different times, multiple vehicles in rotation. I want security on them at all times, close enough to intervene within seconds. Marco nodded. Already arranging it. But boss, at some point running isn't enough. We might need to take the fight to them before they bring it to us. The suggestion made sense strategically, but Lorenzo hesitated, thinking of Amelia's request that he always come back, of Isabella's drawings and pancakes, and the life they were building together. Let me talk to the family first. See if there's a way to resolve this without full war. That evening, Lorenzo gathered Amelia and Isabella in his study, Marco present as witness. We need to discuss some changes. The security situation requires adjustments to your routine. He kept his voice gentle but firm as he explained the new protocols, watched Amelia's face tighten with understanding of how serious the threat had become. "Is this permanent?" she asked quietly, hand protectively on Isabella's shoulder. "Just until things settle." Lorenzo hated the lie even as he told it, knowing full well that once you were in his world, truly in it, there was no settling. "I'm meeting with the Castellano leadership tomorrow to try to resolve this diplomatically." Amelia's eyes met his, seeing through the diplomatic phrasing to the violence underneath. "Be careful. Please." The please broke something in him, the vulnerability in her voice, the way she'd come to care for him despite everything. "I will. I promise." After Marco took Isabella to prepare for bed, Lorenzo pulled Amelia into his arms, holding tight. "If something happens, if things go wrong tomorrow, Marco knows what to do. He'll get you, and Isabella somewhere safe, somewhere they'll never find you. There's money, documents, everything you'd need to disappear." Amelia pulled back, panic in her eyes. "Don't talk like that. Don't talk like you're not coming back. You promised, Lorenzo. You promised. And I mean to keep that promise. But I need to know you'll be safe no matter what. Need to know Isabella will grow up protected even if I can't be the one protecting her." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth with desperate intensity. "You've become everything to me, both of you. My reason for being careful, and my reason for being ruthless. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." They made love again that night, slower and more tender, every touch a promise and a goodbye just in case. Lorenzo memorized the feel of her curves under his hands, the sounds she made when he touched her just right, the way she whispered his name like a prayer. The meeting with the Castellano leadership took place in neutral territory, a restaurant closed for the occasion, both sides bringing equal numbers of soldiers to maintain the fragile peace required for negotiation. Lorenzo laid out his position clearly. His family was off limits, Isabella and Amelia untouchable. In exchange, he'd maintain current territorial boundaries and avoid the aggressive expansion that had marked his earlier years. The Castellano patriarch, an old man who'd built his empire on brutality, laughed. "You want us to respect your boundaries when you've respected none of ours? You've grown soft, Valentino. Love makes men weak." Lorenzo's expression went cold. "Love makes me dangerous in ways you can't comprehend. It gives me something to protect, someone to be ruthless for. Test me on this, and you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go." The threat hung in the air, violence promised in the measured tone and empty eyes. "Touch my daughter or the woman I love, and I'll dismantle your organization piece by piece, starting with everyone you care about." The old man studied him, calculation visible. Strong words from someone in a weakened position. Before Lorenzo could respond, chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the tense peace as a faction within the Castellano organization, younger and more reckless, attempted to take out Lorenzo and seize power from their own patriarch simultaneously. Lorenzo's training took over, body moving before thought, taking cover and returning fire with deadly precision. The restaurant became a war zone, bullets and bodies and shattered glass creating a scene from nightmares. Lorenzo took a bullet to the shoulder but kept moving, kept fighting, driven by the absolute need to survive and return to Amelia and Isabella like he'd promised. The firefight ended within minutes but felt eternal, Lorenzo standing among bodies breathing hard, blood soaking his suit, but alive. The Castellano patriarch lay wounded but breathing, his would-be usurpers dead. "Truce," the old man gasped. "Your point is made, Valentino. Your family stays untouched." Lorenzo drove himself home despite Marco's protests, needing to see Amelia and Isabella with his own eyes, confirm they were safe. He burst through his penthouse door to find Amelia pacing frantically, her eyes widening in horror at the blood covering him. "Oh God, Lorenzo." She rushed to him, hands fluttering over the wound in his shoulder, his face, checking for other injuries. "I'm fine. It's not as bad as it looks." But his voice shook with reaction, adrenaline and fear and relief, making him unsteady. "It's over. We're safe. They've agreed to leave you and Isabella alone." Amelia pulled his mouth to hers, kissing him with desperate relief, tasting salt from tears she didn't bother hiding. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she demanded against his lips. "Don't make me wonder if you're coming home." Lorenzo held her tight with his good arm, breathing her in. "Never again, if I can help it. You and Isabella are my priority now, my reason for being careful. I'm done taking unnecessary risks." Later, after his wound had been cleaned and stitched by his private doctor, after Isabella had been reassured her papa was fine and tucked back into bed, Lorenzo found Amelia in his study staring at Sophia's photograph. "She'd be happy," Amelia said softly. "That you found Isabella, that you're giving her the life Sophia wanted for her, that you're trying to be better." Lorenzo wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think before answering." He felt her tense slightly. "When I was in that restaurant, bleeding and fighting to survive, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not obligation or duty, but genuine desperate need to see you again, to hold you, to hear you say my name." He turned her in his arms, looked into eyes he'd come to love more than his next breath. "Marry me, Amelia. Not because it makes sense for Isabella, or because of convenience. Marry me because I love you, because you've become essential to my survival, because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life knowing you're mine and I'm yours." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair. You just got shot defending us. You're probably in shock. This isn't the time for life-changing decisions." But her hands cupped his face, held him like he was precious. "We're a mess, Lorenzo. You're a criminal and I'm a nurse who believes in saving lives, and we're held together by a little girl who lost her mother and needs us both. How is that supposed to work long-term?" Lorenzo smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his usual control. "It works because we make it work. Because love doesn't have to make sense to be real. Because despite everything that should keep us apart, we've chosen each other. Say yes, Amelia. Take a chance on this beautiful mess we've created." "Yes," she whispered, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, I'll marry you, you impossible, dangerous, wonderful man. I'll marry you and hope we don't destroy each other." Lorenzo kissed her then, sealing the promise, knowing they faced challenges and complications and a world that wouldn't understand. But they'd face it together, building something beautiful from blood and danger and unexpected love. The wedding happened quietly 3 months later in a small ceremony with just family and close associates. Isabella served as flower girl, solemn and beautiful in a white dress, scattering petals before her aunt walked down the aisle to become her mother officially. A year later, Lorenzo stood in the hospital holding his newborn son. Isabella pressed against his side, chattering excitedly about her baby brother, while Amelia watched them with exhausted joy. His life had transformed from fortress of isolation to this, messy and complicated and more beautiful than anything he'd earned. "What should we name him?" Amelia asked, voice soft with wonder. Lorenzo looked at his daughter, his wife, his son, the family he'd found through impossible circumstances and defended with everything he had. "Alessandro. It means defender of mankind. May he grow up to be better than me, loved like I love him,